He looks like he's all ready to go. I know we're a little bit ahead of schedule, which is great. That's always a good thing. So we're going to go straight to that. And really, thank you guys so much for supporting PitchCon. Thanks for being here and watching these presentations. I am excited now because I just get to sit back and watch smart people talk about baseball. So I'm going to bring on Ariel now and welcome him here. Hey, what's up, Ariel?
How are you, Nick? How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. I'm so happy my thing's done. This is fantastic. I love the background with this. I'm going to give you the floor right now and going to open your presentation. But everybody, welcome to Ariel Cohen, and I'm excited to hear about the ATC projections.
All right, thanks so much, Nick. Tough act to follow, indeed, and thank you to all the pitcher list and Alex Fast for having me present. Very excited to be here at this very first PitchCon, and today it's on my presentation. Look into the ATC projections, which is what I've been known for in the fantasy industry. So let's dive right into it. First, a little bit about me. Then we'll talk about projections in general. We'll talk about the ATC methodology, what I do with projections, a little bit of how to use it, and your Q&A at the very end. So about me, a little bit of history about what I have been up to. Well, I started playing fantasy baseball in college. I became a professor at my college right after that in 2003. I jumped to the actuary profession. For those who don't know, an actuary is an insurance professional who's very good at math, who sets rates and does all the number calculations. And I'm actually the vice president of risk management at my company right now. So risk and insurance and math is right up my alley. I started the ATC projections back in 2011, not to do anything in the industry, but just to win my own league. Why not, And that I did, and I won a couple of them in a row. And then I entered a contest called Tout Wars in 2015, which is run by Tout Wars. You basically can pick any player that the Tout did if you pay $1 more, and you can draft your own team. And I finished second nationally. So I said, wow, I guess these ATC projections, there's something to it, really. I tried my luck in the NFBC, and I won my very first year, which was fantastic. In that league that I was in, we had a couple of Fangraphs writers and talked to them about it, and they helped me get all the way up through Saris to Dave Appelman, and Fangraphs published my projections, which was fantastic. In 2017, I started writing only a couple years ago. In 2018, I started podcasting last year, and of course, now here we're at PitchCon 2020, so we feel complete, right? List of my awards and accomplishments so far. Pretty good in the last couple years. FSWA Writer of the Year for last year. A bunch of nominations over the past couple years. Fantasy Pros, I was dubbed their most accurate fantasy baseball expert, and ATC was dubbed as the most accurate fantasy baseball projection of 2019. And I play in a bunch of expert leagues as well. Where you can follow my work. I write for Fangraphs, where you can get the ATC projections. I also write articles over at Rotographs. You can read some of my stuff at CBS Sports and Sportsline. ATC projections are up there too. In fact, I have some July 1st projections, partial season ones. You can get those on at Sportsline. I write for Rotoballer, and I am a host of the Great Fantasy Baseball Invitational podcast, Beat the Shift Edition. I do that with my buddy Ruvain Guy. If you haven't checked that out, please do. It's a fantastic podcast. We do tons of strategy, not just players. We do players, of course, but the strategy about when do you pick up players? When do you drop them? What about risk, auctions, everything that you don't hear on any other podcast, we do on ours. So check that out. The Great Fantasy Baseball Invitational podcast. Justin Mason is our editor, publisher. So please check that out. And on Twitter, you can follow me at ATCNY. Okay, so now talking about projections. So before we talk about ATC, let's just talk about projections in general. What is a projection? In its very basic form, a projection is a forecast about the future. right? It's what will happen next year. We're fortune tellers, right? And a baseball projection, of course, is the best estimate of a player's true talent for a given period of time. Usually we talk about a 1 year, although you could have a 3 year projection. I'm sure baseball clubs do 3 5 year projections or whatever length of contract they're issuing for players. You want to know what to expect from a numerical standpoint. One thing that I've done for the fantasy baseball industry is I operate from the fact that I'm an actuary and I deal with insurance, and I have brought insurance concepts to the baseball field. Let's study how to project players, how to evaluate players with an insurance angle, an insurance eye, and I think that gives me a little bit of a leg up. And it certainly has for projections. But I do all the time modeling. I work with hurricane models, earthquake models, fire models, terrorism. I've actually modeled alien invasion, if you can believe that. Meteorites falling, all kinds of things, and how often does it occur? How much insurance damage will it be if it happens? Will it affect one person? Will it affect many people? So I'm very familiar with modeling here. In its very simplest form, an insurance projection is the estimate of an insurance company's assets and liabilities for the given period of time, usually 1 year or 3 year, 5 years, whatever we're projecting out. And I do something very similar to what I have up there on the right. In fact, that actually is something that I produced. These are formed from 100,000 simulations called Monte Carlo simulations of what could possibly happen in the year 2020. I believe this was some property line of business that we write. And you can see that it's very important to note it's not just you're going to make $1 million. It's not a point estimate. That doesn't really tell you anything. There's no way that anybody can predict within a penny of what happens. You know what you should be targeting. You know what the average expected return is, or at least you feel that you know what it is, or you're projecting that, and that's the point estimate that everyone's talking about. But it's really a wide range of possibilities. Here, if you look at the worst case, I have my company having $86 million of loss. Now they take in some money to charge for that, and a profit loss of $52 million. Ouch. Ooh. At the very best, my company takes in money. They only have to pay $4 million in loss, and we make just under $30 million, an 80% return on our premium, and everything in between. That kind of mentality really should be what everyone has. People talk about upside. Oh, I like this player's upside. Upside really is a probability, right? A player at the 90th percentile will get 50 homers. At the 50th percentile, maybe he'll only have 35 homers. At the 10th percentile, probably 0, because then he'd be injured for the year. So you should really be aware of the fact that it's not just a point estimate, it's a whole range. The very basics of baseball projection now, I split things, and you should think about playing time and rate, right? It's how much playing time you're going to play, how many at-bats, how many games you're going to play, how many innings you're going to pitch, and what you do in that time. Do you hit a homer every 10 at-bats, 30 at-bats? Do you steal a base? How often do you do that? Which is more important here? I'd argue playing time. Some of the biggest profits you can have in playing fantasy baseball is where you have a leg up on knowing, hey, I think this guy's going to play more. DJ LeMahieu last year, people say, well, don't draft DJ LeMahieu. There's no place to play in the Yankees crowded infield. You got Andahar, Gleyber Torres, Greg Bird. There's no way DJ LeMahieu is going to get. He'll play 4 days, so take down your projections by 30%, 40%. If you had an inkling that, high-skilled players would play, you would have drafted DJ LeMahieu. Knowing the playing time really matters a ton, and everything should be based on that. Once you get your playing time and you get your rates per playing time for your stat, you multiply to get your full numerical projection. Every single projection has elements of these 3 things. Okay, if you're having a projection model, you're doing three things at the core. One is regression to the mean. If a player hits 30 homers one year and 32 homers another year and 31 homers the next year, and the following year he hits 40 homers, well, it's possible that he learned a new skill, but generally speaking, it's going to be some kind of luck. And if you were going to project, you might have an uptick from the 31, 32 that he previously exhibited. But just to say, well, he had 40 homers last year, not just call it 40. Nah, he's going to come back to earth. He's going to come back to what his true talent is. That's called regression. It also works upward. If a player had 30 homers and all of a sudden hits 10 and he wasn't injured, there's going to be some regression upward. All projection systems do that, gravitate towards the middle. Waiting of years, if you're considering what a player has done in the past, surely last year is going to give given more weight than 2 years ago and 3 years ago and 4 years ago and whatnot. That's something that all projections do. And aging curves. If a player is 38 years old, 28 years old, 29, 30, 31, 32, with age, your talent gets worse. So even if you've been hitting exactly the same thing, you've been the same talent every year, you're going to get worse with age. It also works with the growth trend, right? 23, 24, 25. Any good projection system will incorporate some aging. Infinite monkey theorem. If you had a million monkeys typing on a million typewriters for a million years, eventually some monkey would produce the entire works of William Shakespeare. Why am I telling you this? The monkey is the epitome of the stupidest thing you can do. If you just hacked at a keyboard, you do something. So when we talk about a monkey can do it, it's the bare minimum that any almost brain dead human can do. Tom Tango developed a projection system called Marcel the Monkey. There he is, the Marcel Monkey forecasting system. And he did the bare minimum. He did all those elements that we talked about. He used 3 years of Major League Baseball data. He weighted the most current year more than the others. Simple aging curve adjustment. He regressed players toward the mean. If you didn't have minor league players who just came up, we regressed at the major league average. That's just the basic things you can do. And you know what? This forecasting system was actually pretty good. It gets you like 60 to 65% of the way there. So the bare minimum really just gets you there with these three simple principles. Okay? If you're sophisticated, which a lot of other projection systems are, you're going to do other stuff on top of that. And it's going to get you a little bit more accuracy. Use additional years of data, not just 3. Use minor league equivalents to represent what they did in the minors. Platoon splits. You do separate regressions by each stat, maybe by each fielding position, not just the general overall. Use X stats, break things down into components. Statcast data, right? Incorporate exit velocity and barrels and everything. If you're a sophisticated projection system, you're going to do that as well. All right. And there are so many projection systems out there. I went on to Picture List, and here's a bunch that I found there, and you can check that out. But today we're going to talk a little bit about what ATC does. ATC methodology. All right. So an old saying from the Ethics of the Fathers, Jewish text, and it's become an old Jewish proverb. You know who is wise? It's somebody who learns from everyone, right? Before you go out and venture and show your smarts and say, I've got a great way, first take a moment to see what everybody else has been doing and learn from them. So I started with this kind of thinking. We're talking about wisdom of the crowds here. The general tenet of wisdom of the crowds is if you just take one expert or one person or anyone or 2 people and you just follow them, you'll get a good answer. If they're a good expert, you'll get a pretty good answer. But when you take a lot of different people and you judge the entire crowd of people, you're going to get a much better answer, right? And certainly what ATC thinks is you can take a look at everyone in the crowd, focus on the better ones in the crowd more than others. Focus on everyone too, give a little bit of credit to Billy Joe over there in the corner who says something wacky. Maybe there's something to it. Focus on the better ones more, but take everyone's. It's uh, the everyone's thought process, everyone's output is important and more powerful and can help you solve anything. That's the general thing about wisdom in the crowds, and I've applied that to projections over here. The ATC projections, if you didn't know, it's called the average total cost projection system. And it gets its name from the economic term average total cost. ATC averages many other baseball projections. ATC is not a standalone projection system. It relies on the wisdom of the crowds of everybody else. It's a projections aggregator, but not just any aggregator. It just says, let's just lop everything together. It's a smart aggregator. It takes the best parts of projection systems. And I'm going to talk a lot more about that in the coming minutes, but it seems intuitive, right? If you don't know anything about projections and you just average them, you might be averaging in a really crappy one somewhere in the middle. You don't want to do that. And ATC happens to be my initials, so that works out. Let's talk a little bit about hurricanes. I mentioned before that I deal with hurricanes, and I do. I'm sure everyone has seen this type of projection, right? A hurricane track is a projection. You see a cone and you see a center line. All right. And here this hurricane is going through some of the Caribbean, and yeah, but you know where it comes from? It comes from what we call a spaghetti model. Spaghetti model isn't just one model. It's actually the conflux of a number of models. There are many people who try to project hurricanes. There's the European model, there's the BAM model, the American model, the fluid dynamics model. There's 25 hurricane models. Some are better than others. I know for a fact the European model is one of the projection systems that's used for winter storms, right? If you ever take a look and turn on Channel 2 News or Channel 5 News or whatever city you're in, whatever number station it is, sometimes they give you some information. They say, "Oh, take a look at this winter storm from the European model." Those of you in the Northeast know what I'm talking about. Maybe if you're out in Florida, you're like, "What the heck is snow here?" But yeah, the European model is one of the better ones. It does a great job, and it can look very different from the others. The point is that there's a lot of different projections, and you can see some of them, on one side over here is going all the way here. Well, some projection system here takes this hurricane to Louisiana. Some of them has it not even hitting land in the U.S. and going up and hitting Nova Scotia over there. That's a pretty wide range. I would not rely on one hurricane model. If I said this is a really good model, still, if you're projecting all the way far left and everyone else is projecting up to the right and to the middle, you'd be crazy to say, I trust this model here. Let's just go with this one. You really should take a look at other models, and so I do for projection systems as well. So we have the blending of models. The hurricane track that you are seeing on the right is really a blending of all the other underlying hurricane models. Important to know about this is this concept. It's true that maybe that hurricane did go left and hit Louisiana. Maybe that one guy out there is projecting, Albert Pujols is going to come back and resurge and hit 50 home runs next year. Sure, it's possible, and it will happen. There's going to be some projections that get things spot on. But in the long term, if you're going to bet year after year about players, and not just even long term, when you have an entire fantasy baseball roster, you've got 23 players. You're looking at 500 players possibly to choose from. It's not so long term. In 1 year, you have 500 samples. You want something that's right, an average time. You want a money line. You want to bet on it, right? You want to get the best long-term predictor. And by aggregating things into one, that's what you're going to get. I'm making this point over and over again, which is the crux of ATC, but it's really important here to understand that you're gaining money in the long-term bet by doing this, right? When I said the ATC won the accuracy projection, we're talking about over the entire player pool or over fantasy relevant players, right? Any one player, I mean, ATC is probably wrong. You can't ever be exactly right. But in the long term, you're going to be high on some, low on some. You want to average it out and be right on an average time. Those hurricane projections we're talking about here, again, these are 3 and 5 day cones, and they represent some probability range. 90% of the time it's going to land here, but that center line is going to be the most likely path. If I was going to bet, I would bet on the center line, right? And that's what you do in a fantasy baseball draft, or if you're looking at stats, right? Usually you get a stat line, 30 homers, 300 average, 85 RBIs. You don't get that full distribution. You get that one stat line. So if you're going to pick a stat line to bet on, you bet on the average, and that exactly is what ATC represents. Now, we talked about doing things simply, and we talked about doing things not simply. Simple average, the easiest way, and many people do this. In fact, most people that I know of, I don't know anybody who actually does my kind of method and takes the time to find how to smartly do this. Very simply, you say, let's just blend them. Sometimes people will say, well, I like this projection more than another. I'll take 2/3 of one. I'll take 1/3 of another. And you blend them all, just average them. One important thing to know about a simple average, it is an improvement on any one underlying. Even if you don't be smart and you just say, just take a third, a third, a third of 3 projections, that will be better in the long term over any one projection alone. Okay? Doing averages helps. But what else can we do? Well, we have the smart average here. And, not all projections are created equally, as we said. Some are better than others. If you're doing a simple average, you're just giving equal weight to everything. The smarter thing to do would be to assign a larger weight to the better models, right? This comes from methodology introduced by Nate Silver, who actually at his very start started with fantasy baseball. He was the originator of the Pacoda projection system, which now is on Baseball Prospectus. And believe it or not, he actually got his fantasy baseball start at Baseball HQ. Most people do not know that. Patrick Davitt actually told me that a couple times. Nate Silver was a fantasy baseball guy. Now he's editor-in-chief of 538.com, which really is one of the most accurate, the go-to projection systems for presidential elections, for any political races that have come about. I had the pleasure of having dinner with Nate Silver a couple of years ago, and we talked about it. And I asked him the question, hey, it was right after the election, Trump versus Hillary. Hey, you still got it wrong, right? You still said Hillary's going to win. What from your projection system do you have to change? And he said, actually, nothing. Our projection system was right. It's just that it wasn't a point estimate. The most likely outcome that was Hillary would win, sure. But there was a scenario where in fact he had 30% chance that Trump would win. There was a scenario that he would win, and he pointed to the fact that, hey, listen, Ariel, if I told you that Michigan would vote for Trump, would you then say that Wisconsin now would vote for Trump? Would you say that Pennsylvania would now vote for Trump? Right? There's correlation. People are underestimated correlations. They said, well, Wisconsin would vote anyway, and Michigan would vote anyway, and Pennsylvania would vote anyway. But those are correlated. And my projections said, yeah, if one goes, you tip the balance of one of Trump winning the state to him because they're correlated. And I mean, the most likely scenario is Hillary wins, but there's a good scenario because of correlation, and there's nothing he would change about the model. Interestingly, we also talked about the fact that back in 2016, I was a presidential candidate from the great state of New York. I actually run, and I was an official candidate. I tallied, and I got 37 votes. Thank you, all those who supported me. People asked me, did I win? No, I did not win. But fun fact, I actually got to give my concession speech in the exact same spot as Hillary Clinton did one day after she did. She actually did it from the New Yorker hotel, and there was an actuary convention there the very next day, exactly from the same podium. And I know the organizer, and I said, hey, would you mind if I conceded the election today here and just take a little bit of footage? I'll take 3 minutes of your time to start the actuary conference. It'll be fun. These actuary conferences could be boring. And so I did. So I actually got to concede from the same podium as Hillary Clinton. And if you actually take a look at it and look at all the presidential candidates of 2016, my name comes alphabetically right after Clinton, Cohen, right after. So we're all tied together. Me, Nate Silver, Hillary Clinton, obviously, that's the way it goes. But why am I talking about Nate Silver here? We're talking about his forecasting methodology, which is a good one. Nate Silver does not do any polling of his own. Here's the very important thing. He has the best forecast system without conducting a single poll. What he does is he collects, he weights, and he averages other polls. He looks at all the polls that he can get his hands on, and he looks at them and grades them, credibility weights them, decides how best to use them in each of them. Then he does a bunch of other stuff and adjusting polls and combining with other economic data, blah, 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 blah. ATC focuses on the combination part, the credibility weighting part, all the stuff in step number 1. Okay. So just to give a thought process here, let's say we're talking about 2 polls, Quinnipiac and Rasmussen. And we've decided, because we've looked at Quinnipiac's results over the past couple of years with what they predict versus what actually happened, right? If they say that the Democrat's going to win this percent of the time, how accurate is that, right? They look at prediction versus results. And they're great in Florida. I'm just making this up. But they're terrible in Nevada, okay? Rasmussen is been determined based on our studying that it's a great poll in Nevada, but it's terribly lousy in Florida. Why in the world would we ever want to use the same weighting of polls, both for Florida and Nevada? I mean, if you're aggregating projection systems, why would you want to do that? You can be aggregating a terrible poll, a terrible projection model. No, we do not want to do that. No, no, no. Let's say I come up with, however, the math part is that I do it, and I'll just mention a couple things I do without going deep into the math, which is kind of boring or maybe exciting if you're into that thing. But let's say Quinnipiac, we've determined 80% of the weight in Florida, but only 30% of the weight in Nevada. That's really analogous to what I do with baseball. I might determine that for home runs, the Steamer model, which is done by Jared Cross, 80% of the weight goes to them. Zips, 20%. But for stolen bases, Steamer really isn't that great a model. Zips is a lot better. I sort of flip them. That's what I do for ATC. It's the whole math is determining what weights to do them. And I use many, many models that many models that are available to me and available to the public and all that. And we study them. We're talking about homers. We're talking about RBIs. We're talking about pitcher strikeouts, walks, hit by pitches, some defensive metrics if I can get my hands on them. They're a little bit tougher. You name them. And we grade them. Now, some metrics maybe have a little bit less projections to use. Fine, they're probably not as accurate, but it's still very, very useful. And of course, if people are not projecting them, it means they're less important, right? All the 5x5 categories of Roto obviously are going to have everybody is going to, at a bare minimum, project them. And you're making a determination on how to weight them. That's more important than the actual weight, the actual math of it at the very end, but we'll go through everything here. So the first thing, as I am talking about, is study, study, study. That's really the first steps. And the way that you do it is you take a look at what a projection system did, what a projection system projected, what they said that a player would do, and you compare them to actual results. A lot of people maybe use the entire player pool. I use more fantasy relevant players in order to get this. I use, I guess, the equivalent of about a 12 team regular 23-man roto roster to really determine this. That kind of depth to get my weighting at the very top. You don't want to weight some really crappy players. That's going to really put a lot of noise in your weightings. You want to focus on what they did right, what they did almost right, but not there. And you do this for many, many years. If you just look at 1 year period, that's very noisy. You're not going to get a good information because a projection system could be lucky or not. They might have changed. What if they change methodologies? It's hard to know, right? I rely on the fact that projection systems don't change methodology. If they do, I try to find out, or at least I'll try and ask some people who put out projections. Hey, what did you do differently this year? Can we talk about what changed? Or hey, I've noticed you've done a lot. Or I've sometimes generated a conversation. I've noticed the projection of this statistic is really off. Have you done something? I can actually almost figure out what that something has changed. And sometimes they'll tell me, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes I don't know the author, and we'll just have to make an educated guess, and I'll have to somehow mathematically figure out, okay, because they made a big change, I'm going to use less weight of that projection for older years and just talk about what they've done recently, right? You have to know the balance of how to credibility weight. Prior stuff, less important. New stuff, more important. But of course, we like projections to be consistent year over year. And we do this for every single statistic. So we're talking about years of data, tons of projections for every single statistic. And then there's math. I don't want to get into the exact details, but we use different methods: regression, correlation, mean squared errors, other statistical methods, some simulation, stress testing as well. To really make sure that no lever that I create is very sensitive, right? If a certain weight of a certain projection is too high, you want to stress test it and see what happens to a projection. If I just nudge it a little bit, does that give a big difference in projection or little? You want to see how sensitive a projection is to changing any one weight. I don't have any. You don't want to let any one weight get too high. You don't want to incorporate some projection with a ridiculously low weight. If it's a really crappy weight, just get rid of it. There's, when we talk about regressions, there are some really good projections, but because of the regression, we're getting a little bit to a mathy thing here. It might not be meaningful. Like adding another projection into a mix, even if it's really good one, might not add enough new information from what you can get from the rest that it just muddies the water, and I throw that good projection out. It's very possible. I also have scenarios where I've got a really crappy projection. It really is terrible. It's awful. It's ranked one of the worst ever. But when you happen to throw in 7% of it, so with everything else, you get an improvement in historical performance. Really wacky stuff. But that happens. So it's not just studying them, it's knowing how to combine them. And that's where the math comes in there. Correlation, you want to see how correlated a projection, a set of projections are with the 1 year to the next. Look at correlation coefficients. And we mentioned simulations. I want to take my projections and simulate and get volatility. It's very important to know how volatile a player is. I often talk on my podcast about the fact that there are some players that I call low variance players and some are high variance in terms of interprojections. Some projection systems give you a very tight band. 18 homers, 19 homers, 17 homers, 19 homers. I'm pretty confident about the ATC projection if I see the underlying projections are really tight. If projections are 40 stolen bases, which can be Adalberto Mondesi is a good one. I've got a projection system that says 60 stolen bases. I've got a projection system that says 30 stolen bases. You get a very, very wide range. That means that my confidence in the accuracy of the ATC projection is not going to be as good. So I get an element of risk with each player, which actually also even helps me draft to know, okay, I'm going to take this guy high up, but I can't take him that high because he's got more risk than another player. I'd rather take an equivalently priced player who's less risky. That simulation really helps with everything. Yeah. I mentioned we do this separately, rates for playing time. A lot of people say, Ariel, do you do this for playing time? They say, where do you get your playing time from? And my answer is, I do this the very same way that I do all the ATC things. I study the projections and I do an ATC projection of what the playing time would be. Very important to know is that the projections and the weights used for the playing time are really different from what you get for all the rates, right? If the panel that I use for home runs and the panel that I use for stolen bases looks almost nothing like what the panel for the playing time is. It's so different. I would say that the manual projections get better as we come to playing time. The automated projections maybe do a little bit better for the rates, and that's intuitive, right? I mean, the human, the rates and how what kind of power a guy has. I really trust an aggregate, a computer to tell me, but in terms of how much are they going to play and where they're going to play, are they going to play? I'm going to play more. They're going to come up from the minors. I trust the experts on that. So we give more weight to manual stuff for that. And at the very end, of course, we take rates and playing time and combine them. One thing I do also is sometimes I have what I call a homogeneous subclass. I project, we project for everybody, but rookies, if you can isolate rookies might get a different weighting than the rest of the population. Injury bounce back players might get a different weighting. I found that certain projections do better in bounce back players, do better in rookies, and all other sorts of homogeneous classes. And if there's enough data that I can say, let's switch on and say, don't look at the overall average, don't look at the overall weighting, look at the homogeneous subclass, I'll do that. It's a balance of homogeneous, having not enough data, right? There's a good statistical balance between that. You don't want to have too tiny a subclass or not have information, even though it's very specialized. Sometimes being part of the whole is better, but if you have enough data for the small subclass, it's great, and I use that as well. And then we generate weights per statistic, per class, for everything in here. And just to give you a little bit of the math and the process that goes on afterwards in terms of what we're combining them, the equations that we use, and when we're aggregating and we're squeezing these projections together, let's just do a random sample. I totally made this up. It's a fictional player, fictitious numbers. Let's say we have these projected homer per at bat. Okay, 3 projection systems. And I've determined that the weights to combine them is 50, 30, 20. The equation that we use is as follows. We take the weight times the weight of A times A, the weight of B times B, the weight of C times C, and that is assuming that all the weights add up to 100. If we're somehow missing data from a certain projection, which happens, like let's say projection B, let's say we're projecting, I don't know, JD Davis of the Mets, of my beloved Mets here. It's missing a projection. Well, I'll do the same math, but then I'll divide by, well, A plus C is 70%. I'll divide by 70% to get a whole projection because I'm missing the 100% of the projections. Multiply through and you get your number. Do the same thing with at bats. Here's our projections right there. Same formula for at bats, multiply them through, and you get that. Now, interestingly enough, I projected for this one 584 at bats, right? which is pretty much exactly what Projection C said. But strangely enough, Projection C only had 35% of the weight. Look at that. It's possible that even though it didn't have the most weight, it might look like the most accurate projection. And of course, that's because we had one lower and one higher. And because we're doing this, we've said, well, projection B, which we trust a lot, says go a little bit under, but there's enough of a reason to go a little bit higher than that. And using the wisdom of the crowds gives you something better. For the final ATC projection, you have your at bat, you have your rate per at bat, you multiply through, and you get your total number. And in the end, we'll give an average projection for this player at just under 48 homers for the year. That's sort of the math that goes at the end once you figure out the weights, which is, of course, the tricky problem. Let's talk a little bit about the ATC logo, which is probably more important than actually anything that goes on here, right? I put a couple of elements that I have. The normal distribution. You can see the curve, the arc of those bars there look like a mathematical distribution. So saying that this is very mathy. I have the Fangraphs bars in there to denote that this is where ATC started. It started up on Fangraphs, so a tribute to that. The baseball stitching, of course, to signify that we're doing this for baseball. If I was doing football, maybe we put in some football logo or something. We'll see. We'll see about that, right? And the blue and orange. I'm a Mets fan, but it's also New York colors, right? I'm a big Islander fan as well. New York is blue, orange, and white. As David Wright said, I bleed blue and orange, so I wanted to tribute to that, and that's why you have those colors in this very awesome symbol for ATC. Very quickly on using ATC. What's the best way to use it, you might ask? Generate auction values. Even if you're doing a draft, a snake draft, look at the auction values as well. Get rankings from there. Use your own league format, right? There's no general ranking. Every ranking is specific to your own format. So use an auction calculator. Fangraphs has a pretty decent one. I have my own personal one, but the one on Fangraphs works pretty decently. You can use that. Under projection, go to Fangraphs, under the projections tab, you can see ATC there, but drop all the way down there, you'll see auction calculator. Compare it to what the market is saying. Look at ADP or look at AAV if you're playing an auction, and see, hey, is ATC showing a player who's undervalued? Is ATC showing a player who's overvalued? But I always tell people, use your intuition. Start with ATC projections. If you think a player is higher or lower, yeah, go on and move him. Nothing beats good old human intuition. But don't do this all the time. If you do this very often, in the long term, you won't succeed, right? For short stints, you can do that, but always check with ATC and say, why am I so far off? Do I really believe that there's a skills change? Always go back to ATC because that's going to be the best long-term average. I want to close with, I've always been asked, will ATC find the next DJ LeMahieu? Will it find the big breakouts of each year? Because remember, if you're swooshing it together, you're not going to get the outsized projections. And my answer to that is yes and no. Well, no, in the sense that now ATC is not going to project these outsized things. You'll never get ATC saying, oh, this guy's going to hit 70 homers. It just can't by formula, right? It's going to average some stuff. Unless everyone's saying 70, it won't happen. But you will have, I stress this, a larger percentage chance of getting a player directionally right. Meaning, if I buy him, will he be profitable? On the lower end, if I don't buy him, or hey, stay away from him, ATC will be right. That increases. You will find the hit rate much more successful on ATC than anything else. You'll be right more of the time. You might not get the full ATC really projected that, but you'll be right of, I should have bought this player, or stay away from this player. And frequency is better than magnitude. I'd rather be right more than be the right magnitude more. Just to give you a quick example of why that's true, and we talk about a buy signal here. Talking about like a stock or anything. Last year, ATC projected Josh Bell in some format for $8. Okay, some other projection system might have projected him for $2, and another one might have projected for $23. The market is the same, right? It still costs you $3 according to the ADP to buy him. And in the end of the season, he earned, let's say, $25. I made that number up, but the question is, which projection system are you best off with? Well, I wasn't tricking you. Yes, you're obviously best off with the projection of Josh Bell is going to make $23 because that's pretty close to the reality. I wasn't tricking you, but it's not as important as you think. The fact that ATC was a good chunk lower than the good $15 lower than other B doesn't matter as much because of the fact that ATC still showed a strong buy signal. ATC showed, hey, ATC is projecting almost triple the profit, right? An $8 player going only for $3, you're going to buy. And the truth of the matter is, you're still going to buy at about $3, right? The market is the market. Josh Bell costs $3. Whether you think it or you think it's 8 or it's 23 or you think he's going to be the next Mike Trout, you're still going to buy him at $3 and you're still going to realize all of the profit. So as long as you're right in terms of the buy or pass, you'll still get all of the value. So that's why I say frequency is more important. It doesn't matter that ATC is not going to project at 23, but if ATC is higher on more players that you want to buy and ATC is lower on more players that you don't want to buy than the market, you will succeed, and that's what ATC does. I think that ATC is even better on its pass signal than its buy signal. I avoid so many traps that other people fall into. Oh, get this guy. No, pass. I think that's the strength of ATC. Two things, if you learn anything from this presentation, bet on the average, use ATC. Can't be more simpler than that. Just to flash you a couple of players, here is some hitters that ATC as undervalued here. Some outfielders that we have undervalued. Some undervalued pitchers that we have. Hopefully, some of you think that these pitchers are also undervalued according to the market, and then you would agree with ATC. And that's pretty much it. And want to open up the Q&A in just a second. Again, to follow my work, please follow me at Fangraphs, CBS Sports, Sportsline, Rotoballer, and please, if you liked what you heard here and want to hear more strategy, not just the numbers, we're talking strategy. The Great Fantasy Baseball Invitational Podcast, TGFBI. You can follow it at TGFBI and follow me on Twitter at ATCNY. I've got the shortest Twitter handle in anybody you'll see in this whole weekend at PitchCon. It's only 5 letters, and 3 of them are ATC. And where am I from? New York. ATCNY. You won't forget that. There we go. So if Nick, you're back, we'll open it up to some questions, I guess. And once again, thank you to the whole Pitcher List staff, Nick Pollock and Alex Fast and everybody else for having me. Really appreciate being here. Thank you.
Oh man, Ariel, that was awesome. Thank you so much for that presentation. I think it was really, really cool to not only just say, okay, cool, this is ATC projections and kind of, talking about the players, but actually more of like what the nitty gritty is and how, what it's like to take on projections, because there are a lot of them out there. And to understand the process underneath and how much work goes into doing obviously successful ones was really incredible. So really, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you, Nick. Really appreciate it.
So I wanted to actually harp in a little bit on that latter part of the presentation a bit when you started talking about certain players. I wanted to look back at, prefacing this, of course, number one projection system, best one. There's always things to improve upon, right? So looking back at 2019, where would you see that, okay, we didn't go and get that guy and they predicted this? Were there any adjustments that you've made for 2020 because of that?
In terms of the methodology that I did, no. I use the exact same methodology for 2020 as I did in 2019 and as I did almost towards the beginning. What does improve, and it actually improves year over year, is the accuracy. I've now got more information about each projection. Now, the weighting changes every year. Right. Once I get new information, I determine that, okay, this one's really better. Sometimes I get new projections that, just pop up. I wait a little bit to include them, right? Because I don't want to say, oh, it's good this year, but let's take a look. And I also wouldn't know how to make a weighting for a new projection system, right?
Sure. Yeah, right.
Once that flows in, I incorporated it, and you can see bigger and better changes, and it only gets better if you think about it.
Mm-hmm. Would you say there is like a blind spot? Like, is there a consistency with the type of player that it just doesn't account for?
Yeah, I was going to say rookies are really the
Mhm.
hardest to project,
Sure.
both in the playing time and also in the rates. Rookies sometimes, hey, this is what they've been doing all the minors, and sometimes, especially early on in their career, hey, maybe it takes them a year or two to get adjusted to major league pitching, whatever the case is. So rookies is probably a blind spot. It's a blind spot for a lot of other projections as well. And again, as I mentioned, I might have a different weighting for certain players, for rookies, for the ones that do better. There was actually a very good projection system a couple of years ago that was actually pretty accurate for rookies, and I
Mhm.
relied a very heavy, had the highest weight, and then that person went and worked for a baseball team, and I lost that projection.
Is
Uh,
that frustrating? Why do they just take all the good people away? Come on. We need
yeah,
you
so
guys.
hey, that happens, and I can't fault that guy for leaving, but that definitely hurt ATC rookies for the going forward.
Sure, sure. Fur Tree Baseball has a really good question. He asks, or she, how do you account for the fact that rates are dependent on playing time? For example, a projection system that views Jock Peterson as a platoon player will give him better rates but less playing time.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. I don't. I treat them pretty independently as I come here. That's probably something that could be improved upon, right? Maybe we
Mhm.
have if I knew what the underlying split is of what the playing time is, righty versus lefty of batters, and then I would know what the underlying split is. We could do a split projection, lefties and
Right. Yeah.
righties, and then do it. Unfortunately, I don't have that information. So
Hmm.
because I can't really get into that, I do treat them independently. It's just something that I don't have the available information for. So you're right. That's actually a great point. I can try to take a look at that. Probably hard in terms of getting the information, but that would be something that would be a big improvement to
Right.
ATC if we could
It maybe
implement.
be something where it's just you can kind of know saying, okay, this one's an inconsistent playing time. So that might be something for you to know, just even reading it. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, we all
Well,
treat them like Excel sheets, have like the flavor of things, but
yeah. And platoon players or extreme platoon players would
Mhm.
be one of my different types of cohorts or subgroups.
Sure.
I never really get enough information to make it work.
Yeah.
So I generally don't do that. But that's one of these things where you have to then take an eye and say, okay, that player, even though the ATC projection says this, it's probably because they're expecting this kind of platoon split, but they're
Mhm.
going to use them more or less. And so you got to mentally say, tick them up or tick them down, or just tick them down in the numbers in your own rankings and then do your calculations.
Sure.
So always have your intuition. Don't take any, I'm
Yeah.
telling you it's true. Don't take it blindly, right?
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, yeah, I mean, I understand this, of course. I mean, I talk about starting pitchers, and a lot of times I see with projection systems that they've been a reliever for ages. And so now that we actually know that they're starting, but the projected innings are not in line with what you would expect because now we actually know that they're getting more innings, but they've never done
Right.
that before. So
Right.
that's always like a lot of differentiation. Some have 115, some have
Right.
140, and that kind of thing. It's really hard to sift
Exactly.
through all of that. Blackout 15 has a great question here. So he says, thanks, Ariel. I switched to ATC 2 years ago and I've won both years. Question,
Glad
if
to
you
help out.
do your own Z-score method for auction values, how large of a player pool would you recommend to get the proper level of replacement?
Oh, okay. Well, first of all, thank you so much for using ATC, and I'm so glad that you won your last 2 years. That the greatest gift to me is for you guys to win your leagues because of using it, and so thank you for that. I use in my own auction calculators. I'll use just the starters. If I know that there's going to be heavy streaming for pitchers, I'll drop down 1 or 2 levels for the pitchers. But you don't want to go and use the entire player pool. There is a site that when they show Z scores online, I won't say who it is, they use the entire player pool. That's a little bit of a mistake.
Mhm.
And of course, it differs for playing formats. But the answer is that you want to use your active playing pool unless you think there's a good amount of churn that comes weekly, and then drop down to 1 or 2 bench spots, one for offense, 1 or 2 for pitchers at the most.
Cool. So C. Clegg has a 257 as a question. Would you say that ATC is generally conservative on most player projections given that it aggregates other systems?
Yes. So by nature, projections are conservative, right?
Mhm.
Even without going to ATC, you're doing regression, and projections are going to be conservative. You're not going to get the outlandish stuff. And by golly, of course, ATC, who's averaging those already regressed stuff, is going to be conservative. But that's fine. it's fine because you're still going to find the guys who are going to be undervalued. You're still going to find the guys that are way overvalued. As long as you get the right buy and pass signals, and you'll get enough players that ATC says is awesome that you can buy, and you don't have to worry about everything. I wouldn't worry about the fact that it's conservative. It's designed to be there, right? If you're betting, right, you find that a conservative analyst is pretty accurate, you don't say, well, I want to make money, but I will say this though: if you're playing DFS and you're doing one day and you're playing one of these things that you got to be 1 in 10,000, don't use ATC. Because then you're not going to find that sample out there. But if you're going to have a 23-man roster of fantasy for the entire season, 162 games, you want to be as conservative as possible. So you want to use ATC. That's my advice there.
Oh, that's great. So Blinks89X asks, do you adjust your projections in season as you gather more info? And if so, when?
Okay, so currently ATC is only a preseason model. The amount of people who do projections that I can get my hands on and use is a lot greater before the season than there is during the season. And I don't have enough confidence that I would publish my in-season projections yet. So far. So right now what I have is preseason only. It's just a confidence level. So in terms of adjusting, the biggest adjustment though that I do use for my own is using in-season data. Yes. And you want to in insurance it's called sort of like the Born Hitter Ferguson method. If you actuaries know what you're talking about, is you want to say that, okay, take my prior projections up until now have been this and weight it some way, but take a look at what has done so far in the year and give it some weight. So I do switch them together. And the more the season has progressed, the more weight I give it, and that gets blended. I mean, it's another weighting that blends into the ATC model, if you will.
Right. Cool. And on the idea of updating projections, how have projections shifted with the half season? This is from Marty Tallman. I love the name. Are they available yet as well?
Yeah, so actually say this is actually the longest I've been doing ATC projections yet, because I still have ATC projections available and we're already talking, and it's May 28th. Yeah. I haven't done a whole refresh. The truth is that I don't know what it's going to be. Is there going to be just division play? Is there going to be more interdivision play? Is there going to be a DH? And I don't know. And other projections, there are very few that have done their underlying work to change it. I don't want to jump the gun and make my own adjustment on top of what other people have done. I'm going to wait till baseball sorts this out. Then I'm going to get my act together and get everything together and weight them and combine them again. That'll give you a new loaded ATC projection. For now, the adjustment I have made, which is only available on CBS Sportsline, is there are some players who were injured, who the previous projection have had too low because they're going to recover. You'll see in that projection, the playing time will have gone up and they're going to get credit for more at-bats. You might see rookies treated differently. You might see pitchers who might have had innings limits that have now changed because, hey, I think that Jesus Luzardo, he's going to chug a higher percentage of the season than he would have for the full season with an innings limit. So you'll see that change on there.
That makes a lot of sense. By the way, Sportsline's subscription is actually available with PitchCon. We have that as a price, so hopefully we can get up to that. But really, that's going to do it. Ariel, thank you so much for coming on. This is really awesome to hear about ATC and really for taking the time to help support us with PitchCon here.
Hi, thanks again for having me, and hope everybody enjoys the rest of this long weekend, and gladly to help kick it off really nicely. So thanks again, Nick.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much for coming on.